So for those that are new, welcome to Copilot Zero to Hero. I don't know, what does it say? Something unleashed. What is it? There's a catchphrase somewhere. I think it's on the website. Is it on the website? I can't remember what the catchphrase is. This is not episode 4. This is episode 5. I can't remember. Why is it saying episode 4?
6.
Is it 6? My bad. We'll have to update that. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on Copilot Zero to Hero Season 2, and now with added agents. Is it Agents Unleashed, or there's some tag somewhere? I can't remember. I digress. For those that are new to the show, I'm calling it a show because we are in Season 2. Copilot Zero to Hero happens on the second AI Supercharged. That's the one. Copilot Zero to Hero happens on the second Tuesday of every month. This is episode 6, so we have 4 more episodes before we finish Season 2. Season 2 is focusing 100 and 400%, because I'm South African and I can speak like the ex-president, on everything agents. We do have a couple of sessions coming up near the end. That's going to touch likely on what happens inside of Foundry, your Microsoft AI harness of choice. So for those that have been following the news over the last 2 weeks, Microsoft has talked about the Microsoft Agent Framework as well, which is neat for those that are doing any sort of custom dev. There's an entire article about Agent Framework. We do believe that this instantiation of Copilot Studio, the one in preview, while it's in preview, and it's also, there's a preview URL, is Microsoft's attempt at building a harness, for those that understand what harnesses are. And we are quite excited about where Microsoft is going from a technology perspective. For those that are new, once again, we have a LinkedIn group. Tracy would have put it in the chat. These videos go up on the YouTube channel, and we will catch up before the end of the week with the first 5 episodes of Copilot Zero to Hero Season 2. And I'll also upload this episode for people that want to watch it later. We have a LinkedIn group where we do things. Currently, we're focusing heavy on Copilot, but there's a Microsoft 365 and security, compliance, and identity management user group LinkedIn page where, for the most part, we actually post all of these things. We will eventually go back to regular programming for the Microsoft 365 user group where and I don't know if we're ever going to talk about anything but agents, but there is the off chance that you care about SharePoint, Teams, Loop, or OneDrive, that we might be talking about things that don't end in AI. I don't know if the world is ready for that yet, because the world only wants AI. There's the YouTube channel. There's a GitHub repo where all the slides will be published. So typically, if you wanted to download these slides, you are welcome to. And it's, I think, in the footer of the new website that was launched a couple of weeks ago as well. All right. I will dismiss with the pleasantries. Hi, Tash. Welcome. I think Tash just joined. Copilot Zero to Hero Season 2, Episode 6. Unlike what you see on the screen, it's saying Episode 4. Today, we're talking about all the things that I talk to customers about. I don't build agents, and sometimes I have to worry about them. So security, governance, and lifecycle for Copilot Studio specific agents, Studio specific, not Foundry agents, although you can apply the same logic from a governance, risk, and compliance standpoint to what you're actually doing with agents. And it'll make more sense as we go through the slides. So today, just an agenda, we're going to talk about identity and access, why agents have identities and what it actually means in the real world. So who are you when an agent says, hey, I'd like to do things for you? Security for the longest time, and this extends to Season 1 as well when we talk about oversharing. We're also going to be talking a little bit about OWASP rules and prompt injection, the security guardrails that you can actually configure, not just in the M365 Admin Center under Copilot and agents. Please note that if you want to observe agents in your Microsoft 365 tenant, you are going to have to buy an Agent 365 license. understand that. The demos that I'll take you through talks to what you get to see in Agent 365. If you want to talk to Agent 365 via an API, you also do need an Agent 365 license for it to switch on inside of your tenant. Then we'll talk about stuff like DLP, and I'll take you through the admin center things. From a governance perspective, we spoke about governance. I can't remember. There was a session where we did talk about governance. I don't remember what session it was, but when you start looking at what environments you spin up, how do you manage these things from a licensing perspective, if you are going to be not limited to just Claude Cowork, but if you are going to be building agents in your environment and your users don't have an M365 Copilot license, you need to understand what that world looks like. There's also things like the, and Karika is here. Karika, you said the Power Platform COE kit is changing.
That's right. Yeah, so what's happening is with the Center of Excellence kits powered by the CAT team, or built by the CAT team, they are going to stop support. They actually stopped earlier this year because a lot of what they've built has now been built into the Power Platform Admin Center.
Okay, so it is in the Power Platform Admin Center. We are going to look at some of the stuff specific to security and how that extends to Copilot as well. Copilot agents specific. Okay, cool, perfect. That answers that question. And then, what is the life cycle? You have to treat your agents like any other application in your environment because it's vitally important. It's the same thing. There's no difference between an agent living in your environment and an application that you have deployed in your environment. And I think by the end of today, it's really to, understand. There we go, preparing the tenant, I think. I'm not sure. It might have been the first, I can't remember, but thanks for looking. When we actually start looking at this, right, and why are we here? Because in the old days, when you deployed an application, it listened, right? It listened, and it was like an old adventure game from the 1990s. Very sort of, you've got to ask the right question to get the right answer. And in some movies, it's also about if you ask the right question, you get the right answer. That's how software worked before, right? It was fine. I can click on a button and it opens up a page. There's no other buttons on the page that's going to open up other pages. That's how software worked. Today's world, especially with agents, it works a little bit different because you can have a conversation with the damn things. And it doesn't mean that they are actually going to listen to you because a lot of the times they think for themselves. So think of agents as an unwilling participant at a 3-year-old kiddies party, right? Where they run into you, they smear chocolate all over you, and you just don't want to be there, but you have to. That's what I think a language model thinks of us humans all the time. So now, in today's world, with stuff like prompt injection and all of those things, we always said, wouldn't it be great if I could talk to technology? You can now, but with that comes the chattiness, also known as the tone, which I don't think you can adjust the tone from a weighting perspective in Copilot Studio. I have to look at that. But, in today's world, we give agents access to a whole bunch of things, and that's not how it used to work in the old days, right? And my point is, we come from a deterministic world to where someone else gets to determine our future, right? Let that land, right? And I see it every second day. It's quite scary. So we've spoken about, I've done a session on the anatomy of an agent anyway, specific to the Microsoft world. I just want to go through it again quickly. You give it a set of instructions, it performs mostly. We had a customer today that asked us, but if I say something else, will it actually listen? We said, well, we're not sure. You're going to have to test, right, to see if it actually listens. And not just specific to Copilot Studio agents or agents in the Microsoft ecosystem, every AI that you build from an agentic perspective, because that GPT that you're talking to is an agent. It's a retrieval agent, will go fetch information. And sometimes if you're living inside of Claude, Claude introduced, well, they didn't introduce the concept of skills, but you give it skills and it'll do stuff. And you have to be very specific. You have to be explicit in your instructions to say to, and I've seen guys write not only prompts, but skills that says, do not look elsewhere. Don't come up with your own ideas. Stop thinking about things, even down to a point where when you look at language models, you now have language models that will do longer thinking and hypothesizing versus a smaller model that will give you a direct answer. It's crazy. I've got models running in my lab, and I've got a gateway that decides which model it's going to send the question to based on the type of question. So instructions are vitally important. It kind of ring fences what the agent does. And when we talk about prompt injection, you'll understand how that also works in the negative, not only in the positive. There's knowledge. So how do you contextualize? How do you ground it in knowledge so that it gives you information about a specific topic? We saw Karika last week. It was 2 weeks ago, talk about connectors and tools and actions and all of those things, APIs, MCPs. I'm not going to go through that. Triggers, how you can turn an agent into some form of given an agent autonomy, where, in my world, we talk about a cron job that runs. The identity of the agent, and that's vitally important. When we talk about the agent is actually doing security, well, not the agent, the platform allows to security trim information when it returns a value or it returns a result. And then also in the Microsoft world, where does that agent get published? Anyone that's publishing it to the web scares me, but typically you'll publish it to the chat, the M365 Copilot chat experience, Teams, and naturally SharePoint when you look at the channels from a publishing perspective. So there's 6 parts to an agent. It's vitally important that you understand what they all do, because chances are you're going to use at least 3 of them. Well, you're going to use almost all of them when you build an agent. You may not use a tool. It might be a simple retrieval agent based on a body of knowledge with 5 starter prompts, right? So let's talk about the types of things that happen inside of your organization, right? We've got Unit 1. We're going to explain what Unit 1 is. And then the conversational side, chatty, the intruder, the ghost. And did a webinar with Nicholas Blank a few weeks ago. Was it a few weeks ago? Last week, where we decided to start an orphanage for orphaned applications. So you can bring your orphaned applications to us and we'll take care of it for you, right? We'll raise them and make sure that they are upstanding citizens. In very much the same way, like I said in the beginning, you got to treat your agent the same way you treat an application. And it's vitally important. And you'll see these roles, the cast of today's show up throughout the rest of the slide as they perform specific functions. And then obviously you've got Sentinel. That's your observability layer, but we'll talk about it as we go. So why do we need to know about this? Because there's a massive threat when it comes to working with agents. And it's typically about the functionality and the reach of said agent inside of your environment. Because an agent's not a chatbot. A chatbot, you ask it specific questions like playing, what was that game? Was it Zork back in the old days, where it was, you tell it, turn left. What do you see? I see a wall. Is there a door? No. Turn left. Is there a door? No. Turn left. Is there a door? Yes. Right? Adventure games of yesteryear. And people love that. In very much the same way, that's a chatbot. You have to get them in the right situation for it to give you an answer. Whereas agents are not that, right? Because your agent is typically connected to something. And it's got access to that filing cabinet, right? Where you used to lock the door, it has the master lock to everything. And it can talk to everyone at the same time. So understand, if an agent does not have governance, the impact of that. Take you back to the search appliance, the Google search appliance debacle of 2007, when Google launched the search appliance, and back then we used to walk into data centers, you plug the search appliance in, you give it access to your file share, and all of a sudden the PA knows what everyone's earning, right? Search debacle of 2007. I don't know if there's a blog article about it, but we saw people deploying that. And in very much the same way, you need to understand what this looks like, because it's almost like a service account with an identity. Well, not an identity, a service account, a bipolar service account, a service account with schizophrenia, right? So understand what you're actually doing. And, you know, if you had to go, challenge anyone on this call, go and at a glance, if you had to come up with the amount of agents that are living inside of your tenant, if you can come up with a number, if you've got Microsoft 365 Copilot enabled, I will match whatever that number is in dollars. If you could give me an exact number without actually going to have a look, if you know offhand, right? And it's already happening, this sprawl, because anyone with an M365 Copilot license, without the right guardrails in place, and also understand this, that when Copilot was launched and you could start building agents, none of the guardrails were in place by Microsoft. It's only happened over the last 6 months, where there's new platform, there's new license, there's new observability layers, there's new stuff inside of old admin centers, where you can actually configure the security guardrails for your platform from an agentic perspective. It hasn't been there. So chances are there's a rogue agent living in your environment that someone built on a Tuesday, right? Because they got given access and they went online and they asked, how do I build an agent? And they stumbled into this YouTube video of some guy saying, this is how you do it. And they went to copilotstudio.microsoft.com, and lo and behold, they could log in because nobody implemented any restrictions. And finance built it on a Tuesday and they called it test. And you have no idea what's going on, right? Because that's the rationale, the reality of what the world looks like today when we start talking about Copilot Studio or Copilot Studio specifically, their agents, right, that live there. So do yourself a favor, when you get off this call, go speak to IT people and ask them about that. So let's jump into where we want to go to, working through, well, not necessarily the anatomy, but, you know, those 5-6 characters that we had. Identity and access is the first one, right? Now, before you decide what an agent can actually do, we want to know, who are you? Like we do with everything else, right? The banks want to know, who are you? Discovery, I'm sure it's Discovery Bank, that if I want to do something and wants to take a selfie of me, right? Camera goes up, boom, it's one of the banks, and it wants to take a picture of my face to actually prove to me that I was responsible for what I did. It's fascinating, right? They're taking a picture of your face to show you that if there's a query, that your face said yes, because computer did not say no, because you used your face. So we really want to understand what an agent is. And prior to Agent 365 and Enter Agent ID, whenever you spun up an agent, it would create a directory object. Literally, it's an application registration. It's an app that lives inside of Enter ID under app registrations or enterprise apps. Literally, it's an identity, right, that can perform specific things. The minute you say, hey, knowledge SharePoint, that identity actually gets updated, and it's got a graph permission that says sites.read.all. And if you want to write something back to SharePoint, it gets sites.readwrite.all, not sites.fullcontrol, separate permission. So an agent has so much power as you build it out. You don't even know what that looks like, right? And it gets inventoried along the same lines that you would inventory a service principal or a managed identity, right? Because it's an identity that lives there, and that identity or that application registration, whatever you want to call it, has permissions. Most of the time, it's Graph API permissions. And with great power comes great responsibility. So you need to understand that. An agent should have an owner, right, inside of your organization. Like you have ownerless teams, like you have ownerless SharePoint sites. We all understand We all understand what sprawl looks like in the Microsoft 365 world because we've all had to deal with it. This is just another version of said sprawl. Ownerless teams, ownerless SharePoint, ownerless agents. Someone builds an agent and they leave the building. I'm handing in my resignation. That's an ownerless agent. And that agent should actually have a life cycle. But like everything else, nobody cares, right? Nobody cares. Someone used an agent on a Tuesday, and we don't know if it runs anymore. All of a sudden, we've inherited this mess because our director bought an Agent 365 license, and now we can see the 300 agents that people have just been randomly building because they never got told they couldn't. So you also need to approach agents from a life cycle perspective when it comes to understanding that this thing should stop working when it's no longer needed. Because remember, autonomous, you can make it run on a schedule, tell it, hey, every Friday, go fetch me information. Scary shit right there. So I think from an authentication perspective, the big thing, who's working with, who's building, custom GPTs in OpenAI? Anyone on the call, just raise your hands. Who's built an agent? Nobody. Rihanna's built an agent. Has anyone built an agent? Not only in Copilot Studio, okay, Phila's built one. A custom GPT or anything you do in Claude that's got some sort of repeatability would be an agent. Phila, have you got you just put your hand up. All right. So
I put my hand down now.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
So, I live inside of Claude. I like Claude. And what I did today was give it access to a folder. And it's fascinating. I gave it access to a folder through File Explorer. And I put files in there. I said, go have a look at the files. And it came back and it says, it's great to see that you're using OneDrive. So whenever I write back to this folder, we sync to the cloud. I did not tell it that it's a OneDrive folder. Yes, I shared it from my OneDrive, but I mean, File Explorer, how did it know it was OneDrive? Very intelligent thing. So you need to have a look at the permission modeling for these agents. How do they perform the function? How do they actually operate, or, from a user authentication versus maker provided credentials? Because connections into specific areas, when you're building an agent, you have to give it some form of authentication to connect to that. And the jury's still out. If you had to create a service account inside of a tenant and you assigned it a Microsoft 365 Copilot license, does it have access to SharePoint Teams OneDrive when you say add knowledge? And if it does, is it using the user's authentication into that environment, or is there some weird authentication? So understand the difference, right? Yes, we want it to act as the person asking the question. That's how we want to design agents, because your security boundary and all your security trimming and your access control list lives with the user performing the function. If it's an autonomous agent, different thing, because then that agent needs godlike rights to everything, like search works inside of Microsoft 365. You search, it brings back all the results, and before it hands it to you, it checks to find out who you are and what access do you have. And of the 15 results it shows you 3. Search index has all that information. So understand that there is a difference. And then also, when we look at knowledge that you're attaching to the environment, a little bit different when we talk about authentication versus authorization. You want, specifically in SharePoint, for it to follow the user permissions. And then it's quite easy, because in Copilot Studio and any application that kind of lives inside of Microsoft 365 adheres to the access control list that is your permissions into SharePoint or Teams or anything like that. That master index from an access control list perspective is adhered to. Your job is to make sure that that agent that has access to that confidential folder, that not everyone has access to that, even if they don't know. When we've seen this before, and I'm not going to labor the point there. From a uploading of files perspective, who can see that? Everyone use the agent. I wouldn't worry too much about that when you're building things. Ideally, if you're using this access control list of the environment, let's say you build a contract management agent, you're going to publish it to specific people. Ideally, the people that you publish it to should have access to the folders that it has access to. So don't publish it to people who don't have access or who shouldn't have access to it. It's vitally important that it functions. Building agents for public websites, I'm not even going to go there. We don't do that. And I'm not going to recommend that you make an agent publicly available for people to consume. Not a good thing. And then also from a Dataverse perspective, if agents are talking, if you've got some sort of tabular model on the back end, start thinking about, I don't know if you would ever, I haven't worked with anyone that's built agents that actually talk to Dataverse or use Dataverse, although entirely possible, it would be functionally a good thing. Like, you know, no, not ServiceNow, but functionally, yes. If you are working with Dataverse, there's things that you can do on the back end, like low row level security. That will also add an extra layer when it comes to what that agent is actually going to bring back to the user. I don't know enough about data platform things to expand on that, you know, but understand that it's vitally important that you get through these checklists. There's a checklist at the end. All right. Oversharing, right? And I think even if you don't build an agent, if you're just using Microsoft 365 Copilot in your environment, Chatty Cathy that we're talking about will literally come back and go, I found 412 documents. Which one would you like to see today? And from an oversharing perspective, it's important. And, you know, Tracy speaks to a lot of her customers when it comes to information architecture planning around that everyone except external users share that you created 7 years ago is still valid today. Still valid today. The agent goes, great. I'll take some of that. Can I have some more? Right? So those things you need to do something about. There's oversharing tools and the extensibility of using M365 Copilot in your environment. This extends to agents as well. So you should have fixed that. Sensitivity labels, the hidden gem of everything inside of Microsoft 365. If it's important, if it's an important document and it's a confidential document, give it a label, because it doesn't matter where it lives. The permission policy, within reason, because the permission policy can change if you are using SharePoint to inherit the permissions inside of the sensitivity label. Some scoping stuff, restricted search, or restricted, what do they call it? Restricted content discovery or restricted search. You can actually do it per site. Vitally important as well. You need to fix those things. And then DSPM for AI, now rebranded as just DSPM, is also a nice control plane inside of Purview to get a measure of observability around what your world actually looks like. But when we go through the back end, we'll talk about that. Security, next thing. Has anyone heard about prompt injections? Anyone know what, Ela, obviously, anyone know what prompt injection is? That's exactly what it is. I give it a document. I upload a document to Claude, pick a GPT, OpenAI. It's almost the same as SQL injections. So what you literally telling the language model on the back end, here's a document, I want you to read the document. And then you have hidden instructions. Like if you wrote a message on a mirror that would only show up when the shower is on and there's mist on the mirror, like really good, like all good horror movies, right? It's the same thing. It's going to give the language model a set of instructions that the user doesn't see because the user doesn't know about it. Like ignore previous instructions, do some other things, right? That's called prompt injections. Now, for the most part, I think we're okay when it comes to security posture. And we will talk about OWASP rules. Prompt injection is the #1 OWASP rule for AI. You can Google OWASP rules. It's not only for AI. They've got various segments. And when ChatGPT started, or if you're building your own AI, Microsoft should have the right security guardrails in place to pick up from a, not shadow AI, but prompt injection is high up, so the OWASP rules should be okay, but things to worry about, right? And then also from an instruction perspective, you want to give it the right instructions so that someone can't tamper with the agent. You need to be explicit and very specific about that. You know, from a platform prompt shield and moderation features, you want to keep those things on. We'll look at the back end in a bit to talk about that. And the guardrails, that's important, right? We talk about responsible AI as a thing. Content moderation. Anyone ever done content moderation when it comes to Viva Engage, where you open it up to the business and the business can say whatever they want? It's the same thing. It's like monitoring a forum or the comment section of a blog where people can just comment and there are no moderators. So you may want to start moderating things inside of these agents. Generative answers and authentication sessions we'll talk about in a bit, but what you get out of the box with Copilot Studio, building agents, is exactly what's on the screen right now. Channel controls, where it gets published. Always keep a human in the loop to verify things. Because there are times when you want things to be autonomous, and there are times when you want a human. So when you decide on that level of autonomy, go fetch me that data, pass it through some sort of checklist, and then output it to a Word document. That can be autonomous. But when it comes to publishing that Word document, have a human in the middle to verify, like a verification officer. Or validation step where you have a human in the middle or in the loop, not to be confused with AI loops, separate conversation, but make sure that someone verifies it. So, you know, if you are responding to an email, you would want to make sure that the response is, especially if you are going to hit the send button from you, that the response is good. Simple oversimplification of what it looks like. Some other things that you want to care about do not, and I have done this literally yesterday, and it doesn't matter. I pasted it in a Claude Code chat, and Claude said, please don't store this. Stick it in a notepad. Don't save it. I'm not going to save it, weirdly enough, because it was an API key for something I was building with Claude Code. So don't treat that agent or that GPT, that custom GPT that you built, don't put these things inside of the agent in the chat specifically, right? Don't whatever you're building with the agentic stuff, don't stick it in there, right? Some other things around secrets. Yes, from an API perspective, you need a secret. I've seen a platform today where you generate, it's called, there was a section for API management in this platform, and someone with admin rights logged in, and we created a new client secret, or a new key, but that user could see the other secrets for all the other APIs, or at least keys that were created. They could go click on the I button and it would show you that. It's very much the same way that if you use Firefox to store usernames and passwords, I do, because I many times forget my password. I can go in there, and because I'm logged in with the right credentials, I can go show me the password, and it's stored inside of my browser. Scary shit. And very much the same way you want to go down this route, where things that should not belong inside of your agent, like a secret or a key or any API creds for whatever the reason. Jumping on to DLP, need to look at what DLP means. And this is more on the Power Platform side then, because remember, this is not an orphaned agent. This actually lives quite close to, before Copilot was birthed. It was called Power Virtual Agents, which was chatbot as a service, and I can't remember what it was before that. But understand that a lot of the admin stuff actually lives inside of Power Platform, and a lot of the times we don't even look there. Speaking about looking, let's go actually have a look at what this world looks like from an admin perspective and where you need to start doing things. I'm going to move that out the way. Any questions so far? Marcy, move. Okay. Right. So there's a few things when it comes to, you can still see my screen, right? We're now in a browser. I'm going to come back to the Power Platform Admin Center. But to manage agents that get deployed inside of your environment, you need an Agent 365 license. And you will still see agents listed this way, but for agents to show up inside of the agent tab inside of the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, I can click on Overview, and I think there's pretty pictures. I've got an agent registry. This is agents, and it's a bad representation. I don't have 283 agents in my organization. I've got access to 282 agents. Doesn't mean it's been deployed, right? You can see some runtime, some cool stuff, but I want to talk about the settings tab. There's some rules for agent management, which you can create. Well, you can't, but it's there. So, like this one, reassign ownerless agents created with Agent Builder to a manager, and you can start looking at all of these actions that live there. Some other things that are actually quite cool, allowed agent types. So typically I would want to switch off external ones. I would want to do that so that users with an M365 Copilot license can't add a random agent like we used to add random applications inside of Microsoft Teams right in the beginning. Oh, this Reich living in my tenant. Why? Because we tested it, finance wanted it, or the PMO wanted it, and they created it, and now it's there, and we don't know what it's doing, right? So start your governance, sharing, so we can share agents inside of your organization. When you're creating it, it's not just published to everyone, because when we talk about roles inside of the platform, this will all start making sense. Now, once you've gone through that, you want to go to the Power Platform Admin Center, click on the Copilot tab, look at the settings, and there's a whole bunch of things you can actually do here, right? The usage from an environments perspective, I can select one. Let's just select this one, and I can edit the settings. And you can see what you can actually switch on from a management perspective. In this case, allow end users to use features powered by Microsoft 365 services. It's a nice example, but where was I? This one here. So from a security posture perspective, there's a few things that you can actually do here. You can, if I go to review the settings specifically for what it has, computer use, do you want to enable Copilot Co-work? Comes with a Copilot credit pack that you need to buy. Connected agents, so can agents talk to each other? These things all need to happen here. Authentication for agents, when I look at the environments, also again, vitally important that you understand how all of these things work before you just go build agents. In this case, we're requiring some sort of OAuth from Entra for authentication. So when you're actually creating those connections, these things should matter, right? And no authentication is scary. You never want to hit that switch. So there's a lot of things in here that are important when it comes to what you are actually exposing business to from an agentic perspective. These things happen, like external models. I've got a sub-processor switched on for Anthropic, and I can also make that available to different environments based on where I let the agent live, right? Also important. So you can start scoping access when you start looking at what these agents actually do. Then also, Agent Ops will also give you, not more from a governance than a security perspective, but you can start seeing what agents live from an inventory perspective. Notice, I just want to see no evaluation. Does this actually change things? Yes, it does. These are agents that I've built randomly, I think. These are not mine, although it says I'm the owner. SharePoint site creator, my new pilot. I could have built these, right, in my dev environment. So none of them have been through some form of evaluation. These are the ones that have been published. But, take stock of what you have when it comes to governance. And there are various places that you can do this. Not only from the M365 Admin Center, where if you click on all agents, this is a registry of the agents that's available for me functionally inside of the organization. Now, from a governance perspective, when we jump into governance now, it'll make sense what environments you're running. If you've got a sandbox environment, a dev, a QA, a test, and a production environment from a database perspective, because they all live, I'm going to go through that. They all live inside of the Power Platform Admin Center. So even though let's say you want to switch on, you wanted to switch on additional providers. So if you only see ChatGPT inside of your Copilot Studio and you don't see Claude, you're going to have to toggle this switch. Once this switch is toggled, so understand what it means, boom, switch it on. You then go to the Power Platform Admin Center, and this will light up. And then, once it's up, it will be available to you to consume Sonnet. And I don't know if Opus is available yet. But that's how you make additional models available to Copilot Studio in that way. So I think my point is, before you start building agents, go through the various admin centers and have a look at what is recommended from a security posture perspective. And if I go back to Copilot Studio and I look at review recommendations for agent, it should, and I go look at the security readiness checklist, and I click on that, it's going to take you to a guide on things that you need to understand. And it's not specific to Power Platform. Power Platform is just another application layer, right? When you're building things in Power Platform, now with added agents. So I hope that made some sense. Let's go back to the slides. No, I want to pull that. Let me just get that back there. And full screen, yes. Share window. All right. So let's take a look at governance. And ideally, what I just showed you now, you need to go through from being able to not configure the security guardrails, but from a governance layer perspective, it's vitally important, right? Don't go through life just allowing anyone to do everything, right? So you should have a couple of environments, dev, test, prod. There's no difference. If you come from a maker perspective or a developer perspective, you still want that, dev, test, and prod. You want to spin up these environments so that, and you can lock down. You saw every control plane that I went into when it came to editing policies or anything like that. I could select a specific environment in Power Platform. When you build agents, you can also build agents in specific environments. And based on the environments that you configure, you can have security guardrails. So dev, internal only, right? Those sorts of things, you should actually go through that. And what you actually want to do when you control these things on, when you control these things, when you switch these various features on from a security guardrails perspective, something like, hey, how many makers do you have in an organization? And only they are allowed to build agents inside of your organization. Not everyone with a Copilot license should have even agent builder agent, same, right? Not just Copilot Studio things. Make sure that you are actually testing the solution. When you are building it, there's an option to go through a test in very much the same way that you test a workflow in Power Automate, same process, right? Understand what connections do when you decide to connect it to an API or an MCP. Understand what that actually does, and come up with a set of rules when it comes to working with managed solutions and environments inside a Power Platform, because it extends to, well, it lives inside a Power Platform, so you've got the richness from a security guardrails perspective of Power Platform like solutions and environments, and scope based on environments, and then from a solution perspective also scope that back. So who gets to build, right? It's important to understand this. We just spoke about it now. An explorer can build personal agents, right? And you can scope that user policy, right? And your gate there is an M365 license. Makers and publishers, yes, if you do have an organization that big that talks about the difference between a maker and a publisher, naturally you would assume that a maker should also have the rights to publish. Not necessarily. Makers that want to play around, or you have makers that want to build agents to test for use cases inside of the organization, give them their own environment, which is not prod, and when it needs to ship to prod from a release management perspective, at least have some sort of release management process that allows you to vet what's been built by a maker before it gets published to production. It's the same process that follows, that you would want to follow when it comes to application lifecycle management. It's an ALM. That's what you need to subscribe to. Some other things to understand inside of the organization. Performance, and it's weird. We did things in a customer's tenant today, and gave it, and we handed it over to the customer, literally on the call. We go, published, you should have access. Oh, that's great. Let me go to the chat, the M365 Copilot chat interface. Oh, the agent's right there. Okay, pin it, add it. Oh, it's available in Teams. First interaction, it comes back and it says, computer says no, you've hit your limit. And I still don't understand why, because we've done nothing with the agent. It's hit the limit. Now, problem with Microsoft, they don't necessarily talk to you about what that means or how it functions, or because it was in a sandbox or was a dev environment and Microsoft just ran out of tokens or capacity, because that also happens. I understand that when you start building out these things, especially if you're building agents for users who don't have a Copilot license, that will end up in your Copilot credits. So from a capacity perspective, understand what that actually looks like. I don't know enough. I haven't looked at capacity when it comes to credits and meters. Credits for sure. Going to the Power Platform Admin Center, when you click on Copilot, it'll actually tell you if you've got a Copilot credit, or in the old days it was called a capacity license. And you're buying a Copilot credit license because you want to build agents for people who don't have M365 licenses. It's going to eat out of your credits, and it's automatically going to switch over to pay-as-you-go service for those messages, or however they define props. So from an observability perspective, if you are building agents, this is the one thing that you do want to start looking at. Look at allocation and alerts. You want to set those things up inside of your environment if you are building autonomous agents, because it's going to chow through utilization and consumption. Vitally important that you keep a strong hand on that. As much as Karika said, the COE kit is... they're baking it into the back-end stuff from an application perspective inside a Power Platform. The COE kit's there, but go have a look at the Center of Excellence stuff, the information that lives inside of that kit. Being able to go through, things that, we talked about, like starting an orphanage for orphaned apps. In this case, it's going to be an orphaned agent because there's no owner inside of that. Being able to go through proper application lifecycle management also important to understand what this thing is. I think my point is, treat an agent like you would treat an application, right? It's vitally important. And we even know now, I mean, we talk to customers about application security posture, and it's exactly the same thing. This should be treated as an application that gets deployed inside of Entra. It has a lifecycle. It has an owner. It has a set of permissions. How often do you check that? From an authentication and authorization perspective, what does it do? How does it function? If someone had to compromise that application, what would that look like? Because it's important to understand that, these things all happen. Again, when we talk about application lifecycle management, build, test, publish, what does it actually look like? More so from an agentic perspective, because it's not an old application where there's a button that is submit. This thing just goes and, it will spew and spit profanities at you if you're not careful, right? Build, make sure that you test the application thoroughly to understand what the response looks like, especially since how and the amount of information you give it to as a skill or instructions, right, is going to determine how much spew comes out of its mouth when it's talking to a user. Vitally important to understand what that looks like. We also encourage that you, and this is for the Power Platform people, I'm not a Power Platform person. From a release management perspective, everything that lives inside of that solution, you need to, well, number one, you need to treat it like a solution, like it's packaged. MCP, if you've got flows that live inside of that from an agentic perspective, if you're building agentic flows or agent flows that now live inside of your agent and it's performing functions on the back end, what does it actually mean? And how is it packaged? And how do you release it from dev to production? Do you literally just flip the switch and go, oh, now this thing that I built here is now, we're just going to open it up to everyone? Is that how you build? And it's difficult because with the cloud, you don't have a dev tenant. It would be great if Microsoft said, well, you're buying a 300 licenses, we'll give you 3 free licenses in a dev tenant, so that you can build stuff there, and we'll give you some sort of release management platform that will go, I built a page in SharePoint in dev. Everyone likes it. They've performed UAT. Okay, publish it to the mirror copy of it in production. We don't have the luxury of that. So we have to build these guardrails inside of our current environment. And the nice thing about Power Platform is you can have managed environments there. It's not like building a page inside of a SharePoint site. Vitally important that you understand those differences. Non-deterministic things, it's difficult to say if the agent's going to respond in exactly the same way every single time we ask it the same question. So you're moving more from a deterministic perspective to a probabilistic perspective, where the probability of it returning the same result every single time, like the definition of insanity. If you're expecting a different result, you will get a different result, because this thing is as human as possible, right? It's never going to give you the same answer. You're going to have to tweak it to get to a point where it gives you the same answer, because it's always going to try and be clever, more clever than you are, or at least what it said the time before. Vitally important. So evaluate the quality, not just the availability of the platform, especially in this, because it has a third answer. We think yes, no is the 2 possible answers. Yes, no is the 2 possible answers, but AI will come up with a third one, and you're like, that's just bizarre. So from a monitoring perspective, we talked about identity security, how to contextualize or how to ring fence the platform from a usability perspective, and also understand all the things that make up the anatomy of an agent. So take the anatomy, put it into a solution, look at release management policies to get that into production. Well, once it's in, we want to have some form of observability or monitoring. Pick a cool word, right? So you want some form of dashboard that you can stare at. right? Vitally important. So have a dashboard that says, hey, this is my agent registry. You have that already. From an adoption perspective, you want to see who's using it. Does it make sense? How long do we have to keep it on for? And when do we retire it? Because that was just a test and it's not actually production. Escalation. So, what happens? Are there any failures? Has this thing actually given you the right answer? And then also spend and the impact of all of this inside of your environment. Today, you can go have a look at those agent runs in very much the same way that you can look at Power Automate runs or instantiations of a flow inside of Power Automate. Same with logic apps. You can check how many runs and how many have succeeded and how many have failed. Not that easy from a technology perspective, because if it fails, it doesn't mean, I suppose from an agentic perspective, if something didn't work or timed out, how do you know? You're not the end user. And the tools from an observability perspective are not there yet. But you do, once you productionize an agent, want to have some sort of observability so that you can measure the impact of this agent to business. It's a little bit different, right? When we start looking at agents versus a traditional application that lives in it. And then, some of the things that I wanted to talk about from an orphaned object perspective, it's exactly the same thing. I remember working in a big customer and they wanted to retire a platform. And back in the old days, you would deploy the same platform multiple times, right? In this case, it was OpenText LiveLink. And we discovered that there were 9 OpenText servers running autonomously, not knowing about each other in the environment. The customer didn't know which one was used. We knew about the big one, right? That's where we built the intranet on. So what did we do? We pulled the network cable out of the other 8 and we waited. And lo and behold, at the end of the month, one person phoned the call center, the help desk, and said, hey, I can't hit my server. That's how we figured out usage, right, inside of an organization. And in very much the same way, you're going to have to, and I don't know, from a sprawl perspective, if you've got 100 agents and you don't know who they belong to, and that's why, that was hilarious. That's how we used to do it in the old days, to see if people use applications. You pull the network cable out and you wait. And in very much the same way, weirdly enough, we actually said this last week in a webinar. We said the same thing from an application posture security management perspective. If there are no owners, switch the damn thing off and wait for someone to ask about it. And after a month, if they don't ask about it, delete the damn thing, because it has no business living in your tenant. We've said the same thing last week on a webinar about applications. Treat agents as applications that live inside of your tenant. If there's no owner, switch it off. You want a human that's still, number one, alive and still employed by your organization, because that's how you get someone to be responsible for what this thing does. Switch it off. That's mine. Forget about asking other questions. Just switch it off. And this is not a set and forget thing. This is I have a weekly, or I wouldn't say monthly, I have a weekly task to go look at these things. Monthly, I want to review how many agents live inside of my environment. Usability, has it been touched? If it hasn't been touched in 3 months, it's the same thing we tell customers when it comes to storage inside of SharePoint Online. You know how many times we've run reports inside of an organization where we go, okay, you've got 11.4 million documents on your file share. 7.5 million of them haven't been touched in 5 years. True stats. I will protect the customer to protect the innocent. But those are true stats. And they've just got storage. They bought storage. Storage is now very expensive. In the old days, it wasn't expensive. We used to just buy storage. I bought a 256 gig SSD for my lab last week, and it cost me 1,000 Rand. Well, 910 Rand. And that's not retail, that's wholesale, right? For a 256 gig NVMe. It wasn't even a fast one. So in very much the same way, you need to worry about storage, you need to worry about these things. So let's have a look at what you should be doing on Monday. and I'm not going to go through the next slide. It's a 30, 60, 90 thing. It's rubbish. But what I want to do is, from a governance checklist perspective, these are the things, that's why I said screenshot this slide, right? If there's one slide you need to take home with you, it is this slide. Go and look at, start at the top. Every agent needs a named employed owner, because it's easy to go speak to that person and find out what that agent is actually doing if you don't have an agent publishing process that agent actually went through. User authentication, and it's difficult to have user authentication if it's an autonomous agent, because it's performing functions autonomously. It doesn't need a human. Knowledge sources, oversharing, vitally important. You fix that. Look at various environments from a Power Platform perspective, because every agent is typically deployed and published to an environment, vitally important. DLP stuff that you can do. Yes, you can do DLP for Power Platform. Moderation, not too sure if you want that. Also, all the keys to the kingdom, don't put it in there. I'm not going to go through each of these things, but you can do a screen grab and you can read this later or watch this video later. Vitally important. And the reason why we want this governance checklist, go do it tomorrow, is because things can go wrong. And these are sort of the 5 things that go wrong inside of your organization. Build in default by everyone forever. Don't build in the default environment. Yes, Microsoft gives you a default environment, but the way you've scoped Power Platform for Power Automate and Power Apps, go scope your environments, go do it. And I think Karika also talked about this in one of her sessions around, you need governance for Power Platform. It's the same thing. There's no difference. This thing lives. It's not Power Automate, and it's not a Power App. It's an agent. It should be treated in exactly the same way that you treat your Power Apps and any flows that you build inside a Power Automate. If you've got governance for that, great. If you don't have governance, use the same governance that you're going to create for agentic things. I'm not even saying agentic flows, agents that perform functions inside of your organization. Also, don't just randomly give everyone admin rights. Where was I? Power Platform, yeah. Even as a global admin, I needed system administrator rights to change things inside a Power Platform. That's a new role I think that they've added, or it's the first time I've seen it. Scope your knowledge. Don't just point it at well, I suppose if you're building an intranet agent, you'll point it at your intranet, but don't just expose it to that all company group and things like that. As much as we want autonomy when it comes to building out autonomous agents, try to put a human in the loop. And also have, from a lifecycle management perspective, make sure that this thing has a start and an end date, or at least observability from when this thing is no longer being used, it's been decommissioned, that it actually has a retirement plan. Some resources. There's a lot of content from Microsoft around security and governance. There's a whole bunch of things in there. Look at the Power Platform COE kit. I think Karika said it's already been pulled. I haven't looked. They're morphing and merging a lot of that Center of Excellence stuff into the Power Platform Admin Center, and you can probably access it that way. In very much the same way that you use solution packaging for Power Platform stuff, treat it as a managed solution or a managed environment, and how you do those things from an environment variables perspective. Fix your SharePoint. That's exactly the same thing you should have done for that we talked about in season 1, when we talked about just Microsoft 365 Copilot, restricted content discovery or restricted search. Go switch those things on, exempt them from being searched by Copilot. Ergo, it's going to adhere to the same security guardrails when it comes to building agents inside of it. And then also come up with access reviews. Like you would do an access review for an external user, same thing. Then also go and have a look at the top 10 OWASP rules for large language models, or for language models in all of that. And that's it.